This is the genesis of our fall 2018 series. We have two speakers that's going to speak today about the work in Baltimore, the community engagement. I know there have been a lot of students who have been interested in community engagement and community design, so this will be a good fit for you all. One of the speakers, Mark, I met at the Association for Community Design, and we built a quick rapport, and he said he just wants to come here and figure out how can he give you all money to do community work. So hopefully more students will come out to hear how you could get money to actually do community work. Another thing we've been talking about with the community engagement piece was with the ACD, the Association of Community Design. They had something called Community Design Days. And I thought this was a good way, it's a good segue into doing an activity in the community. So we have something lined up on September 8th. I know I sent it out via email today. We're going to have someone from NDC who's going to speak later today about that if there's any questions about that. And there's some flyers on a table with the MAPS organization. So definitely look out for that one opportunity to see something actually get built. All right, so we're working with AIA Baltimore and the Neighborhood Design Center and Morgan State University. So hopefully students will take advantage of that. So right now I'm going to have Mark. Mark's going to come up first, introduce himself, and kind of give an overview of the Enterprise Rose Fellowship, Architectural Fellowship. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Evan. I appreciate that. Well, good evening, everyone. We're excited to be here. And as Evan mentioned, we are here because of a conversation that took place earlier this summer. I'm on the board of Association for Community Design, which is an organization that advocates for public interest design across the country, advocating both on policy, finance, and also work in lower income communities. And so we held our national conference here in Baltimore in collaboration with NDC. And I happened to interface with Dr. Akers and Evan in one of the panels where it was a panel that was specifically organized for people of color only. It was a sort of an experiment on social awareness of some of the issues that people go through in society. And so the ACD conference really is a very intimate conference to talk about some of the social justice issues that are happening across the country as it relates to the design realm. So that's how this impetus started. But then also, Morgan State put out an article about your proactive practice, which is encouraging increasing the number of minority architects and designers in the field of architecture. And at Enterprise, that's something that resonated with us. We are about leadership from all types of experience. And so today, you're really going to hear, I'm going to talk about today the fellowship through a series of 5 stories. And 4 of them will be anecdotes from past Rose Fellows, so you get a chance to see their work and the scale of which the impact of their work actually takes place. And then the 5th story will actually be told directly to you by my colleague here, Daniel Greenspan, who is a current Rose Fellow with Baltimore at Bon Secours Community Works. And so today we're going to talk about comprehensive community development and what we mean by that, or comprehensive community development through the Enterprise Rose Architecture Fellowship. And what we mean by that is comprehensive community development is what are the ancillary services that needed to be provided in the community to help stabilize. At Enterprise, we are a housing intermediary, so we deal a lot with nonprofit organizations across the country who are doing real estate deals. And a lot of that involves housing. A lot of that involves economic development, such as the influx of or insertion of grocery stores into communities. But we realize at Enterprise, through a lot of what we've tested in the past, there's much more involved in a community aside from housing to help stabilize or re-energize or revitalize a community. And so today, Daniel and I are really going to talk about those stories within the anecdotes that we'll share. So to start off, we really want to talk about a quote from one of our Enterprise's board members, from Dr. Megan Sandel, where she talks about, I want to write a prescription for a healthy home. And just a small anecdote is that this experience actually came from Dr. Sandel dealing with a patient, a young child who was not developing at the regular pace. The child wasn't speaking at the age that they were supposed to be in. They were not talking, and they weren't walking as they were supposed to be in a regular development. And so during the treatment of this patient, something came up during the process that this child started to see dramatic improvement, where the child started to speak very regularly in full sentences and specific phrases, and then started to walk fairly quickly during the treatment phase. And what ended up happening is Dr. Sandel realized that the child started to improve when the parents actually were able to rent their own apartment. During that time frame, when the child was developing, they were actually housed inside in one of their family. They were all together. They were sort of jam-packed in there, and so there wasn't really room for the child to be able to walk around because the house was very packed. And then the mother and father were working multiple jobs to make ends meet, and there wasn't time to spend time with that child, and the child was not getting the attention it needed. And so that was critical, that housing played a really important role in helping the stability of this child's growth. Sure, I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So we want to talk about a little bit of history of affordable housing. Here's a statistic from HUD, which 38.9 million households are burdened with housing expenses. 1 in 3 households are affected. So this statistic really points out to show that a lot of families across the country, not just in dense communities, but all across the country, are actually affected and are housing burdened. And so just a little bit to backtrack, to provide a little bit of context, the Federal Housing Administration was created in 1934 as a response to the housing crisis of 1930. And really those projects were sort of a fruition of public housing as we've seen it. And also in between this time frame, between 1940 to 1970, those were a byproduct of public housing that you've seen in those high-rise towers. And here's a perfect example of that is Pruitt-Igoe in St. Louis, on the left-hand side with it's in a heyday when it was first developed, and then when the project was doomed a failure because of the social issues that happened at Pruitt-Igoe. So during that time frame between 1934 and 1970, this was definitely the byproduct, and it created a set of social issues that really affected growing families. And so today, in current times, really the affordable housing market and what's put out there is actually now a byproduct of public housing and also projects that are developed by private investors, and such as CDCs. And Enterprise works with a lot of those partners across the country. And so really, with the rising cost of housing, with job wages not increasing with what families need to provide in current society, families are really cost burdened. We're getting to that point where families are spending more than 60% of their income on housing alone, and which doesn't allow means of income to provide, to increase like the family structure, to be able to spend time at the zoo or go see an exhibit at a museum. So these are some of the issues that a lot of families are facing. And just to simply say that we will need and we will continue to need more affordable housing as we progress throughout society. And at Enterprise, for those of you who don't know, we're locally based. We were founded not far from here by Jim Rouse in Columbia, Maryland. As I mentioned, we're a housing intermediary, and we work a lot with nonprofits and for-profit organizations to help provide housing across the country. And so we work in two processes. So we work at national initiatives. So in national initiatives, we're working with HUD, we're working with bigger organizations to work on policy levels, to work on financing packages to make affordable housing more possible. And then we work in local markets, in place-based markets where we're testing. And the Rose Fellowship really is a byproduct of that local market. And what we do, with these two organizations, we feed into each other, and we're using the local market and the results that we're getting from the local markets to help inform our policy, to help advocate on a national level. So at Enterprise, we ask really big questions. In the fellowship, we ask questions to help us push the envelope for affordable housing. How can housing solve for more things? How can they be more comprehensive? How can design decisions generate comprehensive impact? And how can design be held accountable? Much like Pruitt-Igoe, of what happened there and how it affected the social structure of the family. We want to make sure that the projects that are put out by Enterprise and the ones that we partner with really are in the process of helping families elevate. And so we come to the Rose Fellowship, which is a program geared and designed for design professionals such as yourself or aspiring architects. So this is just a small image, and we started in 2000, we're 18 years old today. We're at 73 fellows, 45 communities, 81 hosts, 11,000 housing units placed. And the Rose Fellowship really is a leadership program geared towards professionals who are interested in public interest design, who are interested in mission-driven work, who are interested in working in affordable housing, who are interested in working in small interventions, and who are interested in the well-being of families across the country. And what's interesting about this is that our small cohort within the last 18 years, the 4 anecdotes that I'm about to tell you, have really impacted the affordable housing industry as a whole and public interest design realm as a whole. Because our work, the work of our fellows really change in scale dramatically. You can see here in the top left, sometimes we partner with organizations and architects like Michael Malton, who's a high-profile architect based in LA, to address issues of homelessness. We work out in the context of Thunder Valley, where we're working with Native American communities to help provide net zero housing in the Indian reservation. Or we work in cities like Chicago, where we're talking about this sort of providing housing for those that need it in sections of Chicago. Or we work in such smaller scales where we can provide interventions within the community that really need it, where there's a need to play, for a place for their children to play, or a place for families to be able to sit out and just enjoy the nice weather, not the 90-degree humidity that you guys have here today. Or we work in even smaller scales. One of our fellows, Kelsey Olselman, based out in Nashville, is working on a game prototype called the Game of Rent. And really, this game is sort of positioned to help sort of folks in higher decision-making tree to talk about how it affects their end users, the clients, how the rent and not being able to afford it really can affect the end user. And so Kelsey right now is sort of testing this game out within Nashville to educate people about the housing issues that are happening in Nashville. And so we get to the anecdotes. I'm going to tell you about 4 fellows that we've worked with in the past 18 years. And the first one is Jamie Blosser. Jamie Blosser is actually one of our first Rose Fellows. She started in 2000. She was partnered with the OK Wingo Housing Authority in New Mexico. And Jamie she came to the Pueblo with the mission to understand. You can see here in the bottom image, there was a public plaza that was in the housing in the reservation that wasn't being used. And she didn't know why. And she wanted to figure out why this public amenity, which was a part of the Pueblo heritage, wasn't being used the way it was supposed to. And during her fellowship, Jamie really worked with the Pueblo community to really figure out what this public plaza meant for the community. And we developed, I believe, 40 housing units within Jamie's time frame there. But what's great about what Jamie was doing in the Pueblo was that Jamie wasn't Native American. She didn't come there as a person to come save the Native American people. She came there with the notion to understand, with a mission-driven work as an architect to help figure out the solutions to provide better housing for the Pueblo community. And post-fellowship, Jamie really took what she learned working at OK Wingo and used it to help better her leadership skills and to help provide opportunity for others. During post-fellowship, Jamie started practicing as an architect in the field and was a designer for a lot of the Native American community. And during that time frame, she started SNCC with 3 other Rose Fellows, which is the Sustainable Native Community Collaborative. And Sustainable SNCC works with the Native American tribes to provide services and design services where they're most needed. And during that time frame, when she was at SNCC, she has since moved to the Santa Fe Art Institute, which is based in New Mexico, where she's creating programs and leadership programs for people to get opportunities to even to work in this industry. She's created a fellowship there called the Community Engagement Fellowship, which is specifically geared to training artists and practitioners on how to engage in communities they're not familiar with, or how to appropriately do it. And then this year they have a revolving residency, which is entitled the Equal Justice. This year, the title was called Equal Justice, and it was tackling issues across the country with artists and other design professionals. And so Jamie really has taken what she's learned from the fellowship and become a leader herself and pushed out during her time in her career. So the second story I really want to tell you about is David Flores, who is based out of San Ysidro, California. And David Flores is really just the epitome of what a Rose Fellow is or has become. David Flores has been at Casa Familiar for 18 years since he started. He is the current director of real estate development at Casa Familiar. And during David's time there, he really worked with the community to tackle social issues to create housing for folks that were near the border crossing area. So for those of you not familiar where San Ysidro is located, it's a small city south of San Diego that's very close to the border, the Mexican border. And during that time frame, you can see here on the bottom right-hand corner is initially where David started with the housing development with this land at that time, and then hence made culturally appropriate housing. And in this case, I believe these were home ownership opportunities for folks in the San Ysidro community that were both architecturally pleasing and akin to the culture that was there. And since then, since 18 years down the line, I don't know if any of you read this article recently. This just came out. Ped East, which is one of the busiest border cross on the Western Hemisphere between Mexico and the United States, just opened. And David really had a secondhand opportunity to help inform the design of Ped East. He worked with the folks who were crossing the border to ease the anxiety of transitioning from Mexico to the United States, to making sure that the design was informed by their experiences, to reduce that anxiety of having to cross where they may live in Mexico but work in the United States, and helping provide dignity and a sense of belonging. And currently rings with what's happening today, counterpart of that argument with a wall being built. Here is Ped East opening an opportunity for entry into the United States in a dignified way. And the third story is really Teresa Huang. She's one of my favorite people in the world. She was paired with Skid Row Housing Trust. And that bottom right-hand corner really epitomizes Teresa's personality and really the body of her work, of her fellowship. Teresa worked in Skid Row, and for those of you not familiar, it's one of the biggest populations of homeless individuals in the country. And during that time frame when Teresa was a Rose Fellow, the push for the design was to just put them in housing, to get them stabilized in some kind of modular format or in a little separate location. But Teresa really worked with the community with boots on the ground and providing dignity back. She knew that the homeless population was sort of a very difficult situation when they're in the brink of being stabilized. And Teresa worked with Michael Maltz, an architect, to sort of design this modular piece, which became a pinnacle in Skid Row. It's very much a marker, but it provides a stability to the homeless population there, where they're dignified, where they feel welcomed, where they feel that they belong, and that there's a sense of well-being in their community. Post-fellowship, Teresa actually worked with Skid Row for a little longer, and then she went off and started her own public interest design practice called Department of Places. And Teresa really is championing nationally across the country. The example I'm showing you right now is a collaboration that she did with Big City Lab, which was an exercise with high school students to learn about the history of their neighborhood and to understand the social conditions that are embedded in their neighborhood that really affected the way that they were growing. And so Teresa here was using her design skills to help students figure out a way and to understand the history of their neighborhood, but also to interview, to get the actual perspective of the folks living in the community, to provide a sense of leadership to youth. And in this case, at the end result, it helped inform the design of public spaces, the location of a potential grocery store. I think they unearthed the fact their neighborhood was actually a food desert in Los Angeles during this exercise. And Teresa really is doing a lot of these exercises, not just in Los Angeles, but across the country. She's done a lot of projects in Philadelphia, but she's taken the body of her work through her fellowship and really helped inform how she practices today. And very much, if you read about Teresa's work, you can, it's very inspiring, very, very much inspiring. And one of the stories I want to tell you about today is also, it ranges in scale, is Annie Ledbury, who's based out of East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation. That's a very long name. It's called IBALT. I'll call it IBALTI for short. So during the time of her fellowship, Annie was really working with smaller interventions in the city of Oakland. It's very much, very comparable to Baltimore, where Oakland is sort of suffering from the well-being of the city across the bridge. Very much so how Baltimore is, a lot of the jobs and a lot of the industry is in DC. So they were very much suffering from that type of relationship. And Annie was really working with small interventions during her fellowship to provide places of gathering, places for children and others to be able to socialize during her time there. And post-fellowship, Annie is still doing that, very much that same work, more in a leadership format. She's still with IBALTI, but she's leading this initiative with Spark It Place. This is a collaboration to actually bring attention to a very dangerous intersection in Oakland. And during that time frame, actually, Annie was working towards making sure that there was a mural there that was work with the community to help provide a great public space and to bring awareness to public safety. And this actually just came out this weekend. This was, you can see here Annie in the corner, very much boots on the ground, leading an initiative, talking to the mayor. So Annie really is starting to lead a lot of these initiatives. She's actually fresh out of the fellowship. She's about a year out. She joined us here in Baltimore earlier this summer to talk about her work. And she's really a great example of a Rose Fellow. And what I mentioned to you earlier about the growth of a Rose Fellowship is that when a Rose Fellow is actually placed within a host organization, a design professional, whether they be an architect, landscape architect, planner, they're really embedded within the community. That first part, the first year that the fellow is there, it's really about relationship building. We understand as an organization, you cannot accomplish the needs and goals and desires of that organization without first understanding the context for which you work. So that first year, the fellowship really is about relationship building. Like the second part really is when the fellow starts to gain legs and the body of work really starts to transition where they have built relationships, projects start to take fruition, funding opportunities are in place. And then towards the end of the fellowship is when we actually start to see the fruition of many of the works that I showed you today, and that have become great examples of public interest design work and work in affordable housing. And the Rose Fellowship really is not an alternative career method for an architect, a designer, or a planner. It is a mission-driven trajectory. Our Rose Fellowship statistics are better than the AIA. There are certain components where our diversity is at 40%, and we are 64% female-led, 40% male fellows over the last 18 years. I believe statistically there's 2% of African American female architects nationally since the beginning of the profession. Two of them have been Rose Fellows. Catherine Williams, who's based out of Northern Virginia, and Shelly Ann Scott, who's based out of Atlanta. So our statistic generally is higher. We have one soon to be licensed in LA. We'll definitely increase our numbers. We're interested in providing opportunities for both minorities and all professions and all types of ethnicities to enter this profession and do mission-driven work. A lot of us actually become licensed architects, focus on sustainability. A lot of us stay in the neighborhoods. As you saw, Annie, David, Teresa, they've embedded in the neighborhood. There's relationships there, and the body of their work comes from those relationships based on their fellowship. And we really are invested in the improvement of communities, not just in housing, but comprehensively, to the benefit of the end user, the tenant. And I'm going to get to just basic logistics. This is the Rose Fellowship model now. We've reduced the Rose Fellowship from 3 years to 2 years because we want to have bigger impact. We're trying to have bigger Rose Fellowship classes and feedback really from our past Rose Fellows that they can actually accomplish some of the work in 2 years. And what's great about that is that we talk about it as faster to fail or faster to succeed. Because if the relationship isn't working, they're not tied to this body of work. But if it is working, it can become great examples of what you've seen, the 4 stories I told you earlier, and have lasting impact throughout that body of work. And so the Rose Fellowship really trains young, emerging practitioners, mid-level. There's no age restriction. We've had people come right out of school and have had great fellowships. We've had folks who have been very seasoned in the field and have become Rose Fellows and really, have then gone on to start their own community development organizations. There's no limitations on the type of Rose Fellow. The Rose Fellow is really created from the relationships and the body of work that they're embedded within that community. And so today, you're going to hear that 5th story from a colleague of mine, Daniel Greenspan, who's based here locally. Daniel has been a Rose Fellow for 19 months and was part of the ACD conference to talk about his body of work here in Baltimore. But I do not want to take away from anything that Daniel has to say, but I would encourage you to listen because his story is very compelling, even in the short term that he's been here in Maryland. So thank you very much.
Hi, guys. So before I started the fellowship, I was at a typical community planning meeting done by an architecture firm. And I was sort of standing off to the side with a couple of women. We were all sort of disengaged from the typical questions of, what do you want your street to look like? What type of neighborhood do you want? Do you want retail? Do you want housing? And these 2 women next to me were starting to talk about just like, they're just small talking, the hassle of doing laundry. And they were going on about that. So I kind of jumped in because that was a little bit more personal than these other questions. And so we started to dive into what this meant, like why laundry was a hassle. And they went into things like their family life is too busy, it's a waste of time. They'd rather be doing something else like going to the gym. That was a big thing about what's better to spend your time doing. And so kind of by the end of this discussion, we had created all these situations where laundry maybe wasn't a hassle. Maybe there's a tutor at the laundromat for your children. Maybe it's a gym where the cycling machine is right there in front of the dryer, and you're spinning with it and making it spin. And so we just had fun with it and tried to get down to like real needs and real day-to-day life problems. And so that's what was really inspirational moment about what I love about design, that it can be a tool to get us outside the box, kind of build off of the skills and powers in our day-to-day life that we already know and get us somewhere that we didn't think we'd arrive. So I've been chasing that kind of moment and testing it in reality ever since with the fellowship at Bon Secours Hospital in West Baltimore at Unity Properties, which is the Housing and Community Development Corporation that's a part of the hospital. And so to understand why in the world a hospital is doing housing and community development at Bon Secours, we have to go back to the just Paris right after the French Revolution, where a Catholic order of nuns was bringing what we would call now healthcare, into the homes of poor families. And they did this without any boundary of what that help meant. They'd help them with cooking, childcare, running errands, just being company. And so their main goal was to bring liberation to these families. Fast forward to 1881, they arrived in the U.S. right here in Baltimore for the first time, set up essentially a mission. By 1919, it had turned into a modern-day hospital. And then fast forward 70 years into the late 1880s, it's now at the height of the crack epidemic. Bethlehem Steel is on its way to close. And the neighborhood's really starting to it's in trouble. And so from the nuns at the top to the social workers in the ER room, they wanted to see what they could do to change this trajectory, because providing ER services wasn't enough. So they went out into the community with the intention to listen, and the priority of the residents was affordable housing, safe, clean housing. And so for the past 30 years, they've been developing housing. They have over 800 units of row home rehabilitation for families, and then new construction for both families and seniors scattered throughout the kind of footprint of the hospital. So then once people have the affordable housing below 30% of their income, you're then stabilized and kind of work on the other things that make up our lives. So then there's a community center that they created in 1998, which does early childhood development, financial services, career development, reentry programs for people who were previously incarcerated. And so that's where this all kind of starts with my relationship with it. It's important to note that the neighborhood we're talking about has almost a 20-year shorter life expectancy than 3 miles up the road in North Charles Village, Roland Park, Baltimore. And so all this work has been done, and there wasn't a name for it at the time, but they realized they were working on all the social determinants of health and all the built environment factors and social conditions that lead to how long we live, essentially. And then so why bring design into this question of the social determinants of health? All this starts with engagement and meeting people with what their real life needs are. And they knew that words and conversations and these typical voting, up and down votes, will get you some places, but not all places, and only get you so far in other conversations. So what could people who think differently, need to test things out differently, how could they be engaged? How can we draw together, imagine together, build things together, and hold each other accountable for things that are easy to say but hard to do, And so we took that. And they also intuitively understood that they're building all this housing. It's all starting to look the same. Why does it all look the same? The age groups are different, the neighborhoods are different. And so the leaders thought there was just another way to personalize this. So the fellowship, I was brought in to work on housing design, sanitation and illegal dumping in the neighborhood, and then a lot of open space issues, vacancy, safe outdoor recreation. But I was essentially a community organizer first with a design inclination and obsession on the side. And so that's been a hell of a learning curve, how to community organize. So I'm going to go into two little stories of projects that I've been working on. The first one was, like I said, vacant lots. And I jumped into it based off of the advice of one of the neighborhood leaders who said to just go where people already are and where the energy already is. And then just follow that, attach on to something. And so he introduced me to about 4 or 5 people who had these dreams of turning some spaces near their homes into something. And so we went from there. We started talking at just dining room tables and over kitchen countertops and designing and coming up with a roadmap. So we put together a handbook to solidify these thoughts and help introduce new people to the process as we move forward, and a living document to change as we go. So all these ideas about water play in the summer, really aggressive play like rock walls, games, public art. The question of these are outdoor spaces. They're beautiful for 6 months of the year. What do we do with them the other 6 months when it's rough out? And then so we kind of brought these individual kitchen conversations out into the lots that we were working on and had these group potlucks. This was the first one where everyone got together, started sharing their troubles, their wins, And this in itself was sort of a little bit of a community organizing situation, but it was also a design tactic to be in the space, to create memories there, change the energy in the spot. And nobody could help themselves. We ended up working on this space, cutting grass, eating the pears in the trees, cleaning up. It didn't last long that we were sat down. So then we kind of took those potlucks on the lots and moved them around each month to different lots to accomplish different projects and mark things off the list. So this is one, preparing a space that we wanted to test out lots of those ideas in the handbook at a pop-up park. Once again, following where the energy was, there was going to be a once-a-year block party and festival on a block where one of the vacant lots was. So we wanted to attach onto it, add this park promenade to it, and test out the ideas. And so we had some open things where people could just come up and enjoy them like in a public park, and then another engagement circuit where people could bring their ideas and their vision for spaces that they have near them. So this was it before, kind of cleaning it up. This was it on the day of. And what got this project rolling, we had a couple of meetings, few people were at them, sometimes up to a dozen, just on the block. It was a block project. But it started rolling when we came up with the idea of a horseshoe pit. It was a game that the guys used to play a while back, and they thought that would activate it and get people there and start to care. That took us a few months dealing with the people who love horseshoe pits. Like, sometimes these ideas are just hidden deep down, and you're just thinking of typical things. Fence it, lock it, don't let people there, it'll get dirty. So this pit it's been the rallying piece so far. We then had to create your own mural wall, area for the children to draw and design their ideal outdoor space. And then afterwards, we started creating these kind of toolkits to design together. We found that hardline drawings, bringing people a floor plan, was intimidating because it's like the expertise is already on the page. You already know the rules. There's all this technicality built into it. So we would sit there as someone talks, I'd start cutting, someone else would start drawing, and then eventually people who were using words started drawing, people who were drawing started directing other people around, and we designed these floor plans together. So this is what that block where we had the pop-up park, the final design for it. Horseshoe pit, barriers to prevent illegal dumping, some of these games for the kids, cookout, some other more interactive art pieces. So then we got to it, just starting from the beginning with the money we had, building the horseshoe pits. And then recently in the summer, it's become, on Friday nights, there's always a horseshoe pit game going. Back when it was raining, guys would come out and fill in the puddles with the pile of dirt that we had. And then before Ravens games, there started to be pop-up cookouts on the space, and it's being used. And so this is what that block will look like. By the end of this year, almost 20 homes are going to be demolished. And what's that little space that we've been talking about right here is going to grow. And it's going to be a lot to deal with if it remains open. So the question is, what does it become? And how do we figure that out? And how's it informed by the residents and not informed by outside people with ideas that are harmless on the surface but may not connect with the block? So if that project was sort of about this little village, starting with small wins, trying to build momentum, we were committed to the place for better or worse, and the idea was to just create something that was usable and change the narrative there. The next project's more of a neighborhood scale of several thousand people. Eventually will become users. It started with a big idea that we needed to chase down, and we had the luxury of finding the right space in the neighborhood. And so this idea started from conversations about the heat waves in the summer and playing with water. Throughout America, people open up fire hydrants and play with them, and they go on all day. But in West Baltimore, it's not really allowed by the fire department and the police for various reasons. But what happens is people still open them up, and then you have this contention between youth, really young youth, and police officers for no reason over a fire hydrant. So how can we make a place where that struggle isn't happening? And then in addition to the logistical factors of public park amenity or public water amenities are far away, they cost a lot for a family with a lot of kids, and maybe you go once a month, but every day during the summer's hot, right? So we found a space. Using typical urban design principles, this is the wrong space. It's like tucked in, you can't see it, it's the back of houses, it just doesn't work. But when we were there and listening to stories, it was a space that people could like let their guard down. No longer could you see like the open air drug market just half a block away. You just were in a completely different world. And so we were there, we were open-minded, and it just became the right spot. It's also at the intersection of two of the affordable housing projects. So there's all these families living there. Why don't we complement that interior stabilized space with something stabilized outdoors to play in? So this is the vision we came up with just early on. Sunny spot in the back for this water play feature, a gathering deck for families to watch the kids on both sides, and then a playground for age-appropriate things. They kind of were concerned with kids from like 1 to 4 years old. They didn't have a place to go. So then we did some cookouts and cleanups and mural projects on the space with the community, trying to bring in this like water motif. We're slowly building up. I'm collecting a bunch of like beach balls that are different like fruits and colors, and it'll be interesting. But at this event, we were making this mural, and these ideas came up for this watermelon hand thing. Kids wanted to dip their hands in paint and put it on there, and someone was eating watermelon, and why don't we just draw rind around it and paint all the seeds, and the kids were just like loving the dots. And so we just continued with this thing that was gathering so many smiles, and we took it to the end and just imagined that what if the water feature itself was a giant smile-inducing fruit made of metal or fiberglass, out of which comes different types of water sprays, and so this has been really successful, and people are rallying behind it, and we'll hear back in a few weeks if we got federal or state funding for it. And so really back to that idea of a prescription for a home. In this situation, for these families, the prescription was for this water park and a place to like let your guard down. So those are just two pieces. The next 18 months of the fellowship is going to be dealing with how to integrate all this design and engagement into actual housing projects. We're organizing some community cleanup crews to pick up where the city sort of leaves off with sanitation. Yeah. And so my role really has just been an intermediary between the residents and sort of these anchor institutions, the government, the funders, people looking to do things but not always being able to connect with on-the-ground needs. And then in a more practical sense, it's been just partnering with residents and getting together and using the power of design to make something physical so that people believe you're serious. If we just talked about these water parks, it only goes so far. But we then start building it, we start making the horseshoe pits, they know we mean it, and they want to have a piece. They want to become a part of it to help, to get their name on it. Doesn't matter. We're just trying to bring the resources to it. Yeah. So yeah, thank you. If you have any questions, Mark can come up.
Sorry, I think I forgot to mention this. So I'm currently the Rose Fellowship Director. I'm very new at this position. I just started on May 1st. But however, I forgot to mention earlier, I was also a former Rose Fellow. I was based in Boston, in Roxbury, for those of you who may be familiar. But so I'm very much in touch with the work that Daniel is talking about and why we want to advocate on sort of a national level as an opportunity for designers such as yourself to participate in. Again, the statistic that I mentioned to you earlier, that this isn't an alternative career path. This is a mission-driven career path that still answers the desire for design, and also mission-driven as a practicing designer, urban planner, landscape architect. So we just kind of want to open it up for discussion, both from the stories that you've heard me tell from the 4 fellows, and also from Daniel's, if you have anything specific. Daniel's locally based, so he'll be here for another 1.5 years, maybe longer. And so there's an opportunity both to collaborate and work with his partnership and his project, in the upcoming months and potentially years. So, sorry.
We're having build days all the time, so if anyone's interested, we can exchange emails or whatever, and I'll let you know weeks in advance, sometimes a day in advance.
And Evan, did you want to say something? Sorry.
I was going to ask a question. How
Sure.
much
funding be received to build some of these projects? Is it all bond secure or is it all coming from enterprise?
Yeah, the stuff we've done so far, no, there's not enterprise. Their sort of investment is just me being there, essentially. And then we've been fundraising for them. So we had the idea, it's just mostly been local pots of money, like city grants, parks and people. It's city grants, parks and people grants. Different banks sometimes do these like small little, but they're small pockets of money. Right now we're just working with like sums of 5,000, 10,000. Now that we've gotten them to this point, we've been applying for state funds that is available to nonprofits and CDCs. So that water park, it's around $400,000 is what we're looking for.
And Evan, just to speak on that, Enterprise has a cultural and competency, or cultural and, I'm butchering the name, sorry. But we do have a grant, which is $5,000, typically to help start or jumpstart a project like Daniel's. There's a book that we wrote called Made with Love that shows examples of projects that we've funded with small stipends of money that really help launch that project, because sometimes it's the aggregation of small funding sources that really make a project attractive, because to attract a big funder and to realize that they've already accrued a certain set of funds, it's very helpful to see that. And that's part of,
Collaborative action.
It's the collaborative action grant. And that's part of what you learn as a Rose Fellow, is that there's this resiliency to raise money, to figure out the partners across the country. And just to name a few, Awesome Foundation gives out $1,000 grants every month just for small innovations just like this. And so, there's so many things you learn in the industry to help you realize some of the projects that, deserve attention, that warrant attention, but, sometimes don't have the capacity to build. So.
Are there any questions for our speakers? I want to have a rep from the Neighborhood Design Center come up and speak. There you go, right here in front of me, that's right. Ben, come speak about the upcoming September 8th activity. Thanks.
Sure. Hey, how's it going? So I'm from the Neighborhood Design Center. We're a nonprofit here in Baltimore that does community design throughout the city and throughout Prince George's County. We have volunteer opportunities throughout the year, so I would definitely recommend checking our website. But there's a specific great opportunity for students coming up surrounding the McKeldin Square Plaza, and sort of thinking up ideas of what we can do with that space in the future now that the fountain's been removed. So there's 20 spots. They're going to go quick. I'm going to hand out these, and you should email our program director, Laura, soon. Yeah, and I think, Ren, you would probably have a better...
So this is in collaboration with the AIA Urban Design Committee. So if you also have any interest in the AIA Urban Design Committee, if you're interested in public space design, collaboration, or studies of public space, this would be a good kind of one-day opportunity. It's a one-day design charrette for Design Day, and it's going to take place at Horde Copeland Mox. So if you're interested in visiting a firm, there's just a lot of good opportunities to come out and see what we're doing on the Urban Design Committee. And then also, if you have any interest in building a temporary installation that will get used by the public, this is a really good opportunity to kind of put your design ideas into action. So if you have any questions, please do reach out to NDC, or I'll be around afterwards to answer questions, and I'm happy to hand out business card or like a email so that you can contact me directly. Thank you.
Yeah. So full disclosure, I'm actually a board member of the Neighborhood Design Center. So definitely, I'm looking to go. I think I was charged to go. And if anyone needs a ride, let me know. My office is in 104, so I'm willing to take some students down there, whoever's interested in going. I know that Justin's going, representing MAPS. MAPS is the Morgan Association Planning student. So if you're all still looking to be a part of an organization, definitely check them out. If there's no other questions for Mark and Daniel, I'm going to end it now. I know there's some classes starting at 6 o'clock. We'll get a chance to talk to these guys about what they do. I know there's a lot of students who've come to me about community engagement and community involvement. This is your opportunity. Right, all the work that you see Daniel's doing down in West Baltimore, you can start putting some of those pieces in McKeldin or any place in the city. So I encourage you to definitely look at the Neighborhood Design Center, get involved with the AIA Baltimore Urban Design Committee, and definitely check out the Rose Fellowship, Architectural Fellowship. For those who are still trying to navigate their way, those who are looking to graduate, even some of our faculty who are thinking about doing something, make an impact in our community. All right? Well, thanks again for coming. Thanks again, guys. I appreciate it.